The MacBook Pro 16 is the single most powerful MacBook that's ever been made, and over the past few months, I've used this extensively as both a travel computer and as my main desktop computer. And one of the things that hurts to say is, this might not have lived up to all the hype. So why is that? Let's find out. And while we're finding out, I'd like to again thank today's non-sponsor, it's me. Very recently, I've started up a new channel where I talk about one of my favorite things of all time, keyboards and typing. Just yesterday, we released a new video on what has quickly become my favorite keyboard of all time, and you can join in the fun and see all of the excitement by clicking on the link either above or below. Back to the MacBook. And quick note, before we dive into the video en masse, no one is sponsoring today's video. Nobody provided me this laptop in any way, shape, or form, and nobody at all, in any way possible, has implanted a mind control chip inside of my brain to affect the script. I'm like 90% sure on that one. With that out of the way, we'll also skip past all of the pricing and spec overview stuff. If you do want to see that, you can find that in my previous videos. And let's get right into my refined thoughts after using this laptop for hundreds of hours. When typing the script, Google Doc wanted me to put hundreds of years. Does Google Docs know something that we don't about how long technology has been around? Conspiracies. The only note about specs that I'm going to mention in this video is this specific version of the laptop that I own. I have the 10-core M1 Max processor, 32-core GPU, 32 gigabytes of unified memory, and the 1 terabyte solid-state drive model. This is the highest-end base model that you can get, and it's legitimately also the most expensive laptop that I've ever purchased. It really hurts me about how much this darn laptop costs. If I had one regret when I ordered this, I kind of wish I would have traded the M1 Max for the M1 Pro 10-core option and then get a bigger solid-state drive, but you know, you live and you learn, and then you make a video complaining about it. Because I said it might not have lived up to all the hype, let's start off with the things that I've disliked because, you know, we got to make up for that spicy intro. The first thing I haven't liked about the MacBook Pro 16 after using it a ton is the size. Not the size, that's not a good way to phrase that. It's not really the size that irritates me, but that the size doesn't really buy you anything extra. There are a few things that we'll talk about here shortly in the things I like category that are provided by the size, but unlike previous iterations of the Pro level MacBook, you don't have to go with the biggest size to get the best performance. I honestly think that because the MacBook Pro 14 exists, that diminishes the specialness of the MacBook Pro 16. Now, I don't think that's wholly a bad thing. You've all heard me talk about my preferences for smaller tech, but it does put the 16-inch option in a bit of a rough spot. I know that's going to raise some eyebrows because some folks will absolutely prefer the bigger device with that much bigger screen and speakers, and those are amazing, and we'll again talk about those shortly because I like them too. But 16 and 17-inch laptops are just kind of rough to transport and fit into traditional laptop spaces. I used the original MacBook Pro 16 when it first came out during my extended work trip in 2019. I traveled for about 3 months to take some classes, and while attending those classes, that MacBook Pro 16 took up my entire school desk. 13 or 14 inches doesn't sound like that big of a difference compared to a 16-inch laptop, but team, it's a world of difference when it comes to the laptop's footprint. But back on that MacBook Pro 16, there was solid performance reasons to get it. It was the only MacBook that had the most powerful Intel i9 option. Even that mid-range i7 was a pretty big upgrade. And because of all those powerful chip options, you needed the bigger 16-inch laptop because it was the only one with the thermal system that could handle the heat produced by all of those chips. And yes, when it was handling that heat, it sounded like a plane ramping up to take off. However, because of Apple's investment in their own processor line, we've got the wonders that are the M1 Standard, the M1 Pro, and the M1 Max chip. And you don't really need the bigger bodied laptops to get the top end of power. It's almost a total departure from how laptops have been designed previously. Even still back in Windows land today, you need a bigger, bulkier machine simply because you need something to handle all the heat. Laptop processors make a lot of heat. Normally. Magic. So in a roundabout way, I just don't think the size unwieldiness is really worth the trade-off anymore. It's funny when you look at the two videos because the size point is a huge positive for the MacBook Pro 14, but it's a negative here. Team, if you didn't know, life is all about perspective. All right, the next thing I continue to have not liked about this specific 16-inch MacBook does not have anything to do with the 16-inch MacBook itself, but you can't really separate the MacBook from its operating system. I have just had a lot of wonkiness issues with Mac OS Monterey. It doesn't matter if it's the 14-inch MacBook or the 16-inch MacBook or my wife's M1 iMac. There are just some weird problems. You've heard me mention this in every MacBook video thus far, so I won't belabor the point today, but I still can't comfortably use my 24 terabyte RAID with any computer in this house running Monterey. I don't know what they did, but it does not work well, and it makes literally every process you use in the computer take so much longer. The numbers sound small, like who cares about the difference between 5 seconds or 30 seconds? But when you spend this much money on a computer and your older, less powerful, far less expensive machine runs it better, well, okay, now that's a problem. Plus a reminder that I've been having issues with audio waveforms in Final Cut Pro. It takes far longer than it used to for the audio waveform to pop up, and that's essentially the way that I edit these videos. And if I can't see what the audio's doing, I can't edit the videos. I'm not going to listen to everything over and over and over and over again. Sometimes it's instant, and sometimes it just takes its old time and shows up when it feels like it. And the thing is that's frustrating to me is it's not a problem on my M1 Mac Mini running Big Sur. It's only a problem on the computers running Monterey. And this last set of problems continues to happen when you aren't plugged into external storage. So I'm having these delays in a lot of weird ways while using the internal SSD. Also, Safari, you used to be my favorite browser, but I've had to basically totally abandon it with the new Mac OS because it grinds to a halt on so many websites. Twitter, Realtor.com. There are just a ton of websites that move about as fast if I were using a dual-core i3 from 2015. I've had to do the formal transfer of authority here in the house to move my browser over to Firefox, and thankfully, just works so much better. Obviously, it's not the hardware, but you can't move these new computers back to Big Sur, so the two are hand in hand. So if there's Monterey problems, there's a MacBook problem. That was about 1,000 words of negativity, and you might be under the assumption that I don't like the MacBook Pro 16. But frankly, that's not true. I wouldn't use this as my primary computer if I didn't like it. I think you can appreciate something that isn't perfect and even could be worse in some ways compared to other things that you've used, but there are. Look, let's move over to the positives because there are absolutely some serious positives and things that I very much liked about the MacBook Pro 16. First off, the power. This is the most powerful laptop that I've ever used. Emphasis, that I've ever used. Yes, I am very excited to get a 12th gen Intel laptop in here because those look insane, but I haven't been able to use one yet. The thing that I've liked about the power here is, sure, it scores well on all those bar charts that tech enthusiasts like to tout as the one single most useful function of a computer, but it's also got a ton of usable power. When moving away from Safari into other browsers, everything works lightning fast, surprisingly fast. Same speed as my custom PC fast. I can have unlimited tabs open, all my programs open at once. I can use the computer without thinking about anything. It's all seamless. Even on those older M1 standard computers, there is a limit where things will start to stagger and slow down. I can use the MacBook Pro 16 almost recklessly, and I don't have to worry about how the activity monitor is going. And when doing these video editing tasks that I do in my 4 videos that I release a week, this is the best computer that I've ever used. Sure, it might not have the same numbers as that beefy Ryzen 5950X that I've got in my PC, but it stands toe-to-toe with it when doing my editing. Programs optimized for Apple M1 chips use, and I'm having a hard time finding another word other than magic. They can just magically get more performance than they have any rights to, and my power tasks finish before I can really accept that they've started. This is remarkable stuff. The next thing that I've continued to like is part of having that bigger computer. I really like the display, and the speakers are fantastic too. Yes, I also like the display on the MacBook Pro 14. It's great for a smaller computer, and spec-wise, it's the match at this. But this display is on a whole other level because it's big enough that you could absolutely use it as your only computer monitor if you really needed to. Sure, I normally use a 32-inch monitor for my day-to-day tasks, but holy crap, I believe that I have enough screen real estate on the MacBook Pro 16 that I could easily switch to just this. All you really need is some cheapo stand to get it into an ergonomic height and at the right eye line, and you're set. It helps that this is also one of the best displays ever made. It's not all just about size here. I'm including external monitors in that list. You need to spend real money. And I'm talking as much as the laptop itself, or more if you get the M1 Pro variant, to get the same kind of contrast and HDR capabilities as the monitor built into this computer. Even my monitor, which did cost more than the MacBook and also hurts me, that one hurts too. That does have the same contrast ratio and the same sort of color depth, but it's capped at 60 Hertz, where the display here has ProMotion and can go up to 120 Hertz. This display, it's the best one ever made. I'm sorry, Dell. I'm sorry, other laptops. Even if you have a 120 Hertz 4K monitor option, it's just not as good as this one. Them's the facts. The screen is so good, it's almost a negative, because there really isn't anything else out there that you can get to match it. Yes, the Apple XDR display exists, but that has a stand that costs $1,000 by itself. My LG OLED exists, but OLED has some burn-in risk, and again, neither can match the refresh rate here. This whole system will be so much better when we actually get some kind of Apple display to pair with this. I'm really, everybody right now, cross your fingers, because I'm really hoping that we get something this year. Please, Apple. Please, you can't just give us a monitor this good and then not give us a standalone version to plug into if we want to work from home. And yes, before I get yelled at for it, or I guess to cause me to get yelled at about it, I can never tell, I do use my MacBook in clamshell mode while working from home. I much prefer to use a single monitor. I hate having to look back and forth between screens. It bothers me when I have to do it all day. The last thing that I've really enjoyed about the MacBook Pro 16 all this time later is a combination of the last two positives. This is basically a desktop computer that you carry around with you, both from a power perspective and from a screen size perspective. Combine those together, it's a full desktop in your backpack. I love that Apple computers do not need to be plugged in to use the full power of their processors and GPUs. I love that the battery life goes a very long way, especially when compared against other power machines. Sure, an Ultrabook or low-powered machine could have better battery life, but this has good battery life and can do the same level of power as your desktop. All you need to put in that backpack with it is a travel stand and a mouse and a keyboard, and you can have ultimate Apple power literally anywhere you go. But at the end of the day, so what, right? It might be a tad heavier and a tad harder to carry around places, but if you absolutely have to have the most mobile power you can get while having a screen that's almost as big as a regular computer monitor, well, the MacBook Pro 16 is the way to go. And if you like this video, and if you also like keyboards and you want to see if the most popular keyboard on the market right now is actually any good, you can find the latest keyboards, etc. video by clicking right here. Click, 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 click. Thanks for watching.